In what way?
Well, I'm supposed to be a senior scholar at the Progressive Policy Institute, and they don't ask me to do very much, but what I do in writing about politics or society, I identify with them. And I've done things for them. I did some of it's in the book. I did a pamphlet on affirmative action, which I think is chapter 4 or 5 in the book. I did another thing for them on social democratic parties around the world and what's happened to them politically and left-wing movements. I've taken part in various conferences and meetings.
This is the same group that Bill Clinton and Al Gore and Dick Gephardt all started back in '84, '85?
Right. Clinton was head of it for 2 years. I don't think it's a secret that the DLC is not very happy with him, and probably vice versa.
Where do you teach now?
Well, I did teach for a long time at Stanford, before that at Harvard, but I retired from Stanford. I was on the close to retirement from Stanford, and George Mason University in Virginia offered me a job. They were starting a new public policy school, and they offered me a position which seemed to be good. And also, I've written about politics all my life, but I've never lived in Washington prior to this stint at George Mason, and so that I thought coming to Washington would be interesting. Then I have a wife my first wife died, who my second wife is a fourth generation San Franciscan, who thinks, however, New York and Washington are much better places to live than San Francisco, which is the kind of thing that would shock both Easterners and Westerners.
You write in here about college professors, and you talk about some studies that show that college professors a lot of them are atheists.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Well, intellectuality, it's a curious phenomenon. I've tried to explain in things I've written about and studied about professors and intellectuals why they're in the United States tend more to be on the left than other groups. I've not, thought too much about why they're atheists. That ties in, I suppose, with the conditions which make them leftists or make them sympathetic to various different kinds of leftist ideologies. Whether there's an inherent tension in rationale, an emphasis on intellectuality, on creative, scientific creativity, and belief in God. Empirically it seems to be so, but I don't know that one could argue it. There are plenty of religious scientists and other intellectuals, but I think compared to any other stratum in the population, that academics and intellectuals are more irreligious.
I wrote down a lot of things that you write about and how we're different than others. And by the way, define American exceptionalism.
Well, the term, as you know, was coined actually by Alexis de Tocqueville. It's just his famous book, Democracy in America. And Tocqueville, who was here in the 1830s, said America is exceptional, by which he meant it is qualitatively different than European countries, and particularly his native country of France. And then he listed all sorts of ways in which it is different. And many of the ways in which Tocqueville stressed the differences are still true, and a lot of those he didn't stress have become true, and some have declined. For example, we're an ideological country, a thing which Americans don't realize since they take their country for granted. But the United States was founded around an ideology. It was contained in the Declaration of Independence. And we talk about Americanism. And Americanism, in the sense of the American creed, as Riedel called it, is an ism, an ideology, in the same sense that liberalism or communism or socialism are isms. It's a set of values, a set of doctrines about the content and nature of the good society. And we've projected this on a population. We differ, we fight among ourselves as to what we mean by Americanism. But we have some unity about the notion that there are various American values. We talk about people being un-American, by which we mean that they don't believe in the American creed. They don't follow it.
Okay, you hear him say values, and he discusses American creed, and then he didn't quite list the 5 which are in the in the book, but he's all around it very well. Okay, a little bit broader context in that. Well, but let me stop for a second. Any immediate follow-up questions based on the video? No. Okay. Good to see his face. See him chatting. I spent many hours, weeks with him. He jokes more in person than there. I'll play up as well, as I have alluded to, some of the changes in his own perspective over time, as he's been very explicit about it, which is very helpful. And especially the back of the Political Man book. But that only ends. That shows his openness and his willingness to change his views of his fundamental aspects of his analyses, from the Depression and his Trotskyite background to Political Man as a secular Marxist, to a more value-informed Weberian combined with Parsons and so forth, which is I'd say one way to label the book he's discussing there. These were not uniquely personal by any means. They were really part of, a good way to see it, as I've mentioned, is a video called Arguing the World, which was on New York Jewish, 4 top smart intellectuals, nationally important, internationally important. Daniel Bell, Lipset, Irving Howe, and Irving Kristol, ranging from journalism to literature to in social science. They were all lower middle class, Jewish New Yorkers, and they all went to CCNY, City College of New York, and they went to a place where they had lunch, which was called the second alcove. The first alcove was the Stalinists. The second alcove was, as he mentioned, Trotskyites, there's all kinds of anarchists, all sorts of people. But they were against simple authority, which they saw as Stalin or Hitler or Franco at that point. So the title, Arguing the World, was challenging, confronting, thinking through alternative ways of approaching the world. And in reflecting around Calvinism, where it was in relationship to the Roman Catholic Church, it was a challenge. But as Calvin, Luther, and then started, but Calvin went further still in challenging the authority of the church and building a new perspective on life. Basically, instead of deferring to and working with the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, Luther and Calvin continued what Weber then looked for the sources of this. And what did he find as the sources? He did a book on this. It's what's in the title of one of those books.
Religion, yeah. Weber wrote a book about religion.
He wrote several books about religion. Why is that important?
From the Protestant point of view, where the Calvinists had this image that you can only save yourself if you work hard. Is that correct? So they are more in control of their destiny through work, yeah.
Yes. I mean that's true of Calvin. That's not the question I asked.
Okay.
The question I asked was, why were they confronting the hierarchy, and was there historical antecedents or cultural antecedents which they may have built upon the guys in CCNY? Even though they were 20 19, 20, 21 years old. They were highly aware of these issues. They talked about them all the time. And but the book and the title of that book, well, he started with The Protestant Ethic as the book. It wasn't even a book, it was an essay at that point. Then he said, why is this different? That is, this came out of medieval Europe, which was very rough and crude intellectually at the time. The Chinese, the Indians were centuries ahead of the Europeans in terms of inventing firecrackers, inventing ways of launching explosives over a wall and into the city and then capturing the city. The Chinese had perfected this, and Genghis Khan learned this from the Chinese, and then in turn burned down and killed or drove out basically all the residents of Beijing and the largest city of Russia and other cities etc. So so Weber wrote initially on the Protestant ethic, asking why it was different from the Catholics, and that's explicit in the book. It's Catholic, Protestant. But as he then went further and said, let's go to broader value differences, and he went to India and China and books on each of them, but not just that is, he was looking at fundamental ways in which they thought about the world, including IR, international relations. The book on China had one ideal type, which were the overseas Chinese, which were a fundamental transformation of the view that they're not entrepreneurial. That is, the overseas Chinese were highly entrepreneurial. They were very aggressive. They were very hardworking. But they did not develop markets. They did not develop a labor force exchange. They did not develop more abstract concepts contracts, which were more impersonal. They were founded, nevertheless, as which continues today. They're deeper personal relationships in Asia than you have in Europe, and especially in Northern Europe, and the U.S. is similar. Are there differences like this within the U.S.? And what are some couple of the most visible examples for everybody to think about, or should just what do you know? Where are people more personally important in the way they think and talk about?
You're talking about individualism in the U.S.?
Yes,
I
wouldn't say individualism is too abstract. Personal relationships may be individualistic, but that is, you may feel emotionally close to other people, but you could still, so the Italians, for instance, are close to other people more so than the Swedes, but the Italians are also highly individualistic in their style. Their creative art has been there since the Renaissance. Okay, so I shouldn't be answering. Well, I am answering with extreme European answers to my question, and I'm asking you where are any of these within the U.S.?
In our readings, we learn about the migration of the Europeans.
Yes.
Okay, and a lot of the Puritans went to New England, and then they went to the greater New England. We're talking about Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and northern Illinois.
Yes, absolutely.
And that corresponds. That was a Scandinavian immigration.
What's the source? Who said this?
Elazar.
See, it's not Lipset. It's not Weber. It's Elazar, and he's gonna get two notes next right now. But what's the difference between Lipset and Elazar in that big respect? Lipset talks about the country, American exceptionalism. Elazar does not. he talks about three. Both of them will say the Americans invented almost nothing. They took these basic values from the Europeans, but they were not. They came from three different groups within Europe, and they were very different among each other.
Exactly.
Okay, if we look at these, in terms of these three types, do they differ in terms of personal relationships and in the importance and the intensity of these?
Yes, and also they different themselves in morals and how
Yeah,
they look at
no, but not too many things at once. So I'm trying to do just with the personal relation.
okay.
That is, the reason to have these and to have these in your minds is that you can think about one at a time. That is, Lipset says there are 5 values, 5 different values. They're not the same thing. They each are 5 distinct values which combine in what he discusses as American exceptionalism. Elazar does not. He uses it in a different way. That is, and so he published 50 books. Elazar did. So he goes into many things. But the simple question I still have two pending questions. I'm having you to articulate where and how other people have struggled with these issues and written about them in ways that transform many other things. Okay, my first question is who challenges authority, and who started to do this historically in an important way. It's happening on this campus right now, along with the Jews and the Muslims, or encampments and so forth.
The students.
Yes.
And also in the medieval times, it started with the peasant revolutions.
Yes.
And it started when the peasants went into the cities, right? They started to rebel against the people who were getting educated in the cities. And,
true. Yeah. Yes. I mean these are all good reasonable points, but they're not. Well, Max Weber did do another book called The City.
Yes.
But he didn't really say that much beyond what you've said. I mean, it wasn't a fundamental original book. The way, what was central was one answer to my other question, which is what are U.S. examples? And one U.S. example from Max Weber is rural-urban. What's the rural-urban difference in terms of personal relations? Lots of people write about all the time. You all should at least be able to talk about this.
And I would say generally people in rural areas typically a much smaller community, and so whether
what do they do?
I think people in rural areas, they even typically a smaller community, and so whether you like your neighbors or not, you generally know them pretty well because it's not like living in Chicago or New York City where there are millions of other residents. So maybe in a big city you meet more people on a daily basis, but you don't really know them that well.
Everything you said is cognitive. There's nothing to do with emotion. You've said it actively, and nothing about the degree to which you take, with 4 people here, how do each of you do your personal styles, and how do you relate to one another rather than being totally separate individuals? You haven't articulated that. How is a rural area? Well, I mean, you've answered cognitively, but what you mentioned could be the sources, the correlates of other things, but the intensity of the personal relationships would be to say, I don't like him because he goes to a different church, or he's a bigger farmer than I am, and I don't like that. But that's different from saying, I see him in church each week, I see him shopping, and whenever we talk, he always disagrees with me. So a personal relationship which is embedded with these other things is what that is getting at. Okay, so that could be one. Let me give another, maybe a simple, a powerful, clear example, which is also related to why are the Asians different from the West? Big question. And what did I say that Weber talked about that made Asia different? I mean, I said it briefly, but the Asians did not develop markets, labor contracts where people could sort of shop for jobs and hire people in other ways, and so forth. That is, the more abstract aspects of capitalism were not about money, was not about greed, which is just sort of the bad things which people widely talk about. It was a more abstract relationship to authority, including to God. Yeah.
But they built the Silk Route, yeah?
But they built the what?
They built the Silk Route, yeah?
Say the Silk, S-I-L-K.
S-I-K route, yeah. And that was all.
The
That was like a marketplace all along the way
Yes,
to
yes,
Europe.
Yes. No,
But that was not in China. That was only along the way.
Good point. I mean, it's a good intermediary in the sense that it was the importance of having this road, a physical road, or at least signs or some ways that you could get all the way from Europe to China, enhanced trade, and that certainly led to markets. But they don't call it. I mean, say in America, the name of a motel is even Route 66 or Motel 66 because the road itself was so important to take from Chicago to LA. By contrast, you mentioned the name of the person who was a critical user of it.
Marco Polo.
Marco Polo was more personally naming the person who did it. Okay, that's a step toward personalistic relationships. Or the charisma of Jesus Christ, Max Weber wrote about as a classically important personal, so many specific aspects of his life were in our, thousands of years later, sanctified and ritually followed. Okay, but the quick answer was a book that was entitled Ancient Judaism. And what was one of the most important aspects of ancient Judaism that he wrote about, that you heard in Marty Lipset, and that you see in the differences that Weber in turn talked about between Asia and the West, and the role of hierarchy in each of these. That is, Asia has more hierarchy, most simply and visibly through the family. The family is much more classically hierarchical, and then today has strong states compared to the U.S. But where does that come from? Is the bigger question, and that's what Weber. That's why he went there. He went to Asia. He worked on Asia. Read all this stuff, tried to figure it out. Why were they so different, or why were they distinctively not impersonal as in the West? Was it something to do with the way you built the road? The answer is no. His big answer was religion. In each of these countries, he studied the religion because religion is the foundation of the basic values, as well that Parsons and Lipset and others have talked about. So let me give an example. Again, I'm deliberately switching countries, time periods, and I'll start with so we mentioned rural urban, but if you have and we link these aspects of markets and signing contracts and personal relationships. If you have, say, 3 companies saying we want to form a 4th company and we're going to join together, the 3 of us, or 4th contract joining us, big important contract. people may fly to Chicago from California, New York, and Florida. They meet in Chicago. They meet in the airport. Maybe they'll spend a few hours. They'll sign a contract. They'll take a plane and go home that night. If you go to Dallas or Houston or New Orleans and you try to do that, what happens? They don't talk about business. So when the national business leaders, many Americans, including physicists or intellectuals, will still talk about their work. I mean, here at the USC especially, people talk about their work a lot. If you go to the South, the American South is more like Italy. It's more like China. And people will say, where did you grow up? What do you enjoy? What kind of coffee do you have? I like your red hat. Where did you get your hat? I mean, they're personal aspects, building in a feel. And let me take it further. If you do the same thing with people in Asia, not just in Houston or the American South, you won't do any business in the first day. It may take many days or many weeks before you can talk about bigger kinds of contractual commitments. People want to know and see the action and understand more intuitively. Even who and how you sing karaoke is a way that you can see how people have a personality, who they choose to sing, who they want to, who do you want to vary? If you choose Elvis Presley or Madonna, how do you transform them when you sing about them yourself, etc.? That's all per question.
I guess I'm struggling to conceptualize how the hierarchies that you're talking about in Asia. How do you compare these, this southern structure of in previous classes we've talked about it being kind of on principle of honor a lot of the time. That's a heavy principle that we see in the South.
Yes.
How
yes.
is this also a form of social hierarchy, albeit different, or is it not a form of social hierarchy?
Yeah, there are two different things I'm talking about, and I'm combining a little bit. Maybe that's part of the confusion, but that's what we have to. This is life, especially more life today, where people are here in our classrooms are not just from the same. Nobody's from Chicago. Many of you are not from America, and you're asking, therefore, and I've tried for decades to have a teaching assistant who could disagree with me and who has a different, and I tried to have, especially to get Chinese teaching assistants because they're usually so different from they're among the most different from the West. Okay. And if we, but let me go one at a time. I think that the easier way is to go back and forth between the general labels like personal relation and hierarchy, which I'm doing, and second, to give you more examples. And so I gave the example of the business people contrasting Chicago versus the South. And if we take it a step further, the Asians would not, it may be by the end of the day in Houston, they might sign the contract, but it might say, I want to take it back and to discuss it with my boss, and we want to think about it. So it may take longer, or they may say, let's spend a week with each other, something like that. Okay. Well, yeah. I'll just mention, I've coordinated for decades now people working in 35 countries, and to find a collaborator in Japan was very difficult. I went multiple trips to Japan. I worked with multiple people who were very, they had the right intellectual, they had the talent to do so, they had skills, they had the money, but things didn't work out. And but that is, I've seen this for decades, as people sit in a table like this, from 5 to 50 people, and they often bring their own cultural perspective on the world, and then we'll argue with each other. And then what kept us together is we say, okay, how can we say that China is really different from Spain, that Spain is different from Italy, and is Spain different from Portugal or not, and how can we capture that? So they have, for instance, they have bullfights are illegal in Portugal. Bullfights are big business in Spain and southern Spain, etc. Why? Why are those different? Okay, so the hierarchy. Now I'm coming back to my first question about hierarchy and who is fighting hierarchy and using, who chose the title Arguing the World, not just the establishment, not just the Washington. This is everybody in the world, and in the way that these people write, and they learned from their parents, etc. They think in terms of biblical kinds of sources. They think of the ancient Jews. They think of all these things, and it's continually there.
Question?
Yeah.
Just on the back of Andrea's questions, are you trying to say that in the South they have religion and therefore they have hierarchy?
No.
Or it's the opposite
Yeah,
around,
it is.
because you have
No,
hierarchy?
but in this example, I'm following Weber in contrasting the type of religion, because the type of religion, both in its practice and its type of rituals, contrasting, say, the Protestants with the Catholics in Europe, the way they would write, and that is, I'm contrasting, on the one hand, theology could be the abstract words of, this is how you believe in, that you believe in the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, etc. I mean, that's theology in a sense, and that can be an elaboration. By contrast, the ritual, for instance, these days now, in the last 20 years, people even in the Roman Catholic Church are bringing in new kinds of modern music, sort of dance kind of stuff within the Roman Catholic Church. So Protestants may have done this earlier, but this and among African Americans, this has been particularly colorful and creative and emotionally moving. But let me get to the book, the title, and the examples of Max Weber, which was Ancient Judaism. He has a section basically saying when the big countries surrounded Israel, Egypt, Syria, etc., when they became more fighting for various reasons, they would attack. They would take slaves from Israel, and the question in turn was how should the Israelis respond? In a sense, it's an IR question. And again, for hundreds and literally thousands of years, the Israelis have been completely destroyed. I mean, Jerusalem has been, everyone has been murdered, killed, taken out, and so forth. Have been replaced between new residents. They in turn have replaced, been fought by others, etc. The dramatic point of Weber is that the emperor, the king, or the lead Israeli of the whole country or of a smaller group would say, "I think we will do this," but the next dramatic step is other people for thousands of years have said, "That's wrong. Don't do that. Don't do that. We don't want to fight in the army if you want to do that." That is, their people would challenge authority for thousands of years. They didn't do that for Franco, or for Hitler, or for Stalin, or I gave the example of the Mexicans 20 years ago. If people challenged them, they were shot. In their colonies, the English listened the English administrators permitted the nonconformist Calvinists to build churches and to teach people in Nigeria and South Africa to become literate. They could read books, and they would then study the Bible. And the Bible gave them a sense, and the reading of the biblical sections which they would teach was Calvinist informed. It was more individualistic, and so the big difference between the Calvinists and Lutherans was what? The Calvinists were bottom up in terms of governance. They chose their leaders of the individual church, whereas the Lutherans would check with the prince or the duke or the king of a country or a region, and if the duke would say, no, I don't want him to be the leader to lead the church at all, he had a veto over it. With the Calvinists, not at all. So the sense of hierarchy was not respected by the by the Calvinists, and that style as well was used by Weber as a key aspect of governance and in religion, to define core values, included challenging, arguing against the world, and you have that in that sense on this campus with Rockefeller. The chapel is called the Rockefeller Chapel, and the issue was not the amount of money. That was a means. How was the means used? It was to challenge and to do new things. So these people made a lot of money at the end of the 19th century. Rockefeller, Ford, others. They built railroads, they built factories, they built stuff. They never happened before in American history. We're all little farmers until 1880 or so. Then they did big things, and they became very affluent. And so then in turn the government said, no, this is bad stuff, and we etc. So but the hierarchy was then criticized by a majority of the population, and one of the values that Lipset talked about was egalitarianism. Okay, and question?
Yes. In the British Empire, right? Basically what they did is they were more willing to hear what the locals had to say, right? And they educated the locals, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so based upon our readings, because they educated the locals, yeah? Those educated local elites.
Do you have your own other camera?
The battery is dead.
The battery's dead. Do you have a cable for it?
No, it's camera.
Okay. Could you have one for maybe even for the end of the year? That is, if we lose.
Okay, I can always recharge my camera.
No, but you should be able to recharge it during the class.
Okay.
So if you plug it in and use your camera as a second, this has happened in both classes. The two of you have both been sick, and so we've missed we've lost some classes. Then I make mistakes as well. So I'm only saying this out loud because I've emailed emailed about not about the cable, but having all of this stuff. The 30 students, most of them are not here. They will lose things if we don't have it properly recorded. That's what I'm stressing. Okay, but we have 3 of you who are here today, and so let's follow up more with the with a specific. So you started to say the English colonialists did what, or what's your point?
Well, based upon the course that we have learned that the British gave a lot of power to the locals, and they educated the locals compared to the French or the Spanish empires, right? So basically these new...
Okay, no, but 2 things. You say By locals, you mean the local people, the citizens within England?
No.
Are you
I'm talking about the British Empire, right?
Okay.
Okay. So basically.
But local is not the right term. So maybe
Okay,
it's.
so the natives.
Yeah. Okay. Now that's it. Natives.
Or
Yeah.
the indigenous
Yes,
people.
indigenous.
The indigenous
Okay,
people.
that-
Okay.
That's what you mean in English. Good.
So the educated indigenous people, right?
Yes.
When those people got educated, yeah, they start challenging the Brits, yeah,
Yes.
and they start creating this sense of nationalism, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And this sense of nationalism came because the Brits were more willing, when they had this Lutheran religion,
Lutheran.
yeah, and they were also Calvinists, yeah. So therefore, because
Yeah.
of that religion, yeah, they educated the indigenous people, and indigenous peoples wanted to grab, that power back, yeah, and they came up with this notion called nationalism. Is that correct? No.
Yeah, I would say you're bringing in. I'm just telling the others. You're studying several. You're doing an MA in IR, international relations. The big theory of IR is to have proximity, money, tanks, and nationalism. So nationalism is the only concept which the IR people do when you or they talk about values. And so that's a step that Lipset has articulated, talking about American exceptionalism in terms of nationalism, is different in the way that nationalism works in France or in England, and so what he stressed following Tocqueville. But what he did through his whole career was really do this systematically and better than, and so we've shown that through the course, that he started with Trotskyite, with Marx, and then went on to more and more sophisticated things. And so the last and most complete statement of a sort of an integrated articulation is his last book, or his last major book. I shouldn't say that, because it was really after that, to get together, we did the breakdown of class politics, and so we did that. That is, I was the young Turk criticizing Lipset to him personally, saying, you're wrong on this, you're wrong on that, and he listened, and we then talked about it. And then gradually built alternatives that went beyond which other people had done earlier. And so he did this in each of his books. But just to fill in one or two more points of linking these pieces together. So if we have a hierarchy, whether it's the Egyptians have a strong hierarchy, or the Roman Empire in Europe, the Catholic Church had strong military hierarchical organizations that kept order, and they killed a lot of people if they didn't follow them, including Jesus Christ. So we've gotten then some examples of where this could generalize to other things. So your articulation is excellent. That is, that the indigenous people, if they learn to read, they read the Bible, they talk about these things in our own town and how to handle this, they in turn can lead to the concept of revolution. So the Australians, the Canadians, in some way gradually broke away from Great Britain. But the first, of course, was the Americans, the United States, and they in a sense had a okay. So I won't go into any. I'm trying to articulate here as an example. Not that there's only that these are the most important single things, but I'm trying to say you should be able to use these kinds of concepts the way I'm trying to do so here. To have examples, to have general concepts, to be able to bring in cases that will fit and that don't fit, and why. And some of your answers today are good, and some you're sort of asking because you're saying you don't see how. And I'm trying to help you to give you examples, but especially readings. In this section, we've had 2 weeks, and we're doing exactly these things. And we saw it in the book last week with especially the Vildovsky book, but that builds in turn on what I said in Max Weber, Durkheim, and Parsons. How did Parsons, when I said Parsons's book, in some ways at least for sociological analysis and much of the social sciences, many people will say the most important book of the 20th century was Parsons's book. And I said, I'll give you a one-page picture. Why is that so important? He didn't do that, but the ideas were there. It took him 800 pages. I mean, I boiled it down. Yes, okay, so why is that so important?
Well, he talked about actors, ends, means, conditions, and norms.
Yes.
And then he...
Down the other side are what?
Utilitarianism, Darwin, Skinner, Durkheim,
Yes.
sociology. Then you have the German idealism, and then you have voluntaristic.
Exactly. What's the big point of those? What does that table? What's the big point, the takeaway that nobody else came up to say that except for Parsons? And they had little bits of it, but he put the whole thing together in that table. And what's the big point of that table?
Well, yes, all the ones that are all pluses are voluntaristic.
The ones that are all yes, they're all plus.
These are the all
Yeah.
the only ones that are able to have all pluses. Yeah.
Yes. But what are the other what are the other perspectives representing in that table? In terms of European social history and thinking, smart people thinking, trying to say, why is our world the way it is? Why do we have religion? Why do we make money? How do we have a stock market? Why by contrast, as Habermas says, they don't have a stock market. They have personal relationships in the cafes of the continent in Germany and France, and the English, they may talk with each other, but they don't just talk with each other. They don't just talk about, is she more attractive? Is it a prettier dress? I was a student. This is what people talk about. I'll just give you an example of that. I think did I mention this in class? I would go to I tried to get to know the French students so I'd see how they were different from Americans or others. They were different. One way that was clear, that is, Americans would often have dates, a boy and a girl together, a man and a woman, just those two. The French would classically meet with maybe 5 of them, 8 of them, 10 of them, in groups like that, and they all met together every single day. And we'd go together to a cafe, and maybe 1 to 2 hours after the dinner, we'd have that conversation. And that conversation, the most distinctive one was the 10 people would take one person and would say, how is he dressed today? What's the color of your shirt? What's the style of the shoes? Why these pants? Your hairstyle, your makeup, all of these things then got this. And so each person would talk maybe 10 or 15 minutes. No one else would talk. One talk for 15 minutes. Next person would go around the room. Each person would talk about how could you be made more personable, attractive, compelling, etc. I've never heard of this in America. Okay. It fits with Habermas's whole interpretation. How does he challenge Marxism? Is Habermas, like Lipset, I hadn't maybe said this so much before, Habermas and Lipset both came from a strict Marxist background, and they both broke away from Marxism. Not leaving it, but enhancing it by adding more. And what Habermas did, even more than Lipset did it in a more macro of nations and voting of individuals. Habermas used the cafe as an intermediary social scene. So the scene, which sociologists and anthropologists more often will bring in, they can think in these terms, like the people did about clothes. So one person, everybody else talks about the other. That is, it's not a, they didn't say here's beauty in the glamour magazine. They didn't say here's beauty in a painting. They look at you, the 5 or 7 people, who's doing it well and who's not. That's an interpersonal relationship of people they know very well from having done this for a year or so. Okay. I'll give you one example. When we were students together, de Gaulle was president. He had just taken. He wasn't really officially. Maybe he was prime minister at that point. I'm not sure. I guess he'd become president. But he'd been the generals in Algeria, because the Muslim Christians, the battles were still going on inside Algeria. So the French military, Pierre Bourdieu went there as a soldier. He wrote his first book about the Muslims within Algeria. So at one point, the generals in Algeria basically said, "We're going to take. We don't know what de Gaulle told us to do. We're going to challenge de Gaulle, and we're going to invade the capital now." So they showed up with these airplanes, and they started, had people. And so de Gaulle immediately went on television, and he said, "Frenchmen, defend the Republic. Keep away the military. Go to the airports. Go to the trains. Stand around and guard, the capital, the National Assembly. It's called. It's like the U.S. Congress. Show them that these military people are wrong." And so in my little group, instead of just talking about clothes, we said, should we join the army as volunteers at this critical moment in French history? And so for most of the, so we talked for about 4 hours. 4 hours, should we, and so I won't be able to prepare for my exams. I have other things to do with the family I should be doing, etc. And so I have a little point, at least to myself. I don't know if I can do this. If I'm an American, I get fought in in guerrilla warfare among the French. If I put on a French military uniform, is this against the law? I didn't know. So we talked about it, and finally at the end we said, 3 of us said yes, we're going to join. So we walked over. When we got to the National Assembly, when they were passing out the uniforms, they were all gone. So no uniforms were left. So we were too late so people could try to volunteer. You could still go to the airport if you wanted, but you couldn't have a uniform. And I don't think they ever gave them any guns. but at least de Gaulle, the leadership of de Gaulle did triumph, but I'm giving you a sense of the personal relationships could not just be, that is, the personal relationship of our little cafe group was highly, we would do very important things for our lives. We could have gotten killed, and we were ready to go. Okay, so this is an extension of the differences between the contract people sign in Chicago and Dallas being say, let's wait, let's get to know each other, and the Asians where they say, no, we don't do things like that. We have to get to know each other better before we sign any big contracts. Okay, so in a sense, this is why they didn't develop capitalism, as Weber talked about. Okay, but we get back to Parsons. What's the point of the table? What's the big point of that one-page table? That these are big theories, the best theories that people had at the time, that came from, Darwin. You have evolution of the species. It's a major 19th century transformation. Or the utilitarianism of including Bentham's version of people try to become more happy, and people try to build philosophy of how you make people more, etc., etc. But I'm going on, and I'm giving you more of the context. And let me maybe stop with this and simply say that the even if one need not read other parts of Parsons, but if one sees the critique and asks the kinds of questions which he was asking, which we are continuing today, we're trying to say we want to use the way the Chinese are thinking, the way the French are thinking, and see where and why they're different, and where and why can we draw, and science, as Durkheim said, begins with comparison. And so nationalism can be a useful concept, mostly if you compare the nationalisms, not just talk about France, 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 or Spain, Spain, Spain. You got to compare. What's the difference between Spain and France? Then you can. Then what data can either show? Okay, so.
One question.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
From my point of view, right?
Yes.
Are we confusing now nationalism with patriotism?
They're close. Patriotism, in that sense, is an emotional commitment by an individual, especially a citizen. There are lots of them, and if there are lots of them who do that and who are very patriotic, and there are many, then you could say nationalism is powerful and successful, say under Napoleon's France, and because we had both, and for them, but the French often, certainly before and then after 1789. They wouldn't talk about just the people here in Place de la Concorde, whether they're using the guillotine. They said, we want to change the world. They thought, they would think, and what's the title of the Jewish New York film and video? Arguing the world. They don't just say one nation. And so when Napoleon marched and conquered essentially most of Europe, they tried to get into Russia. They went south and went all the way. They went all the way to Cleopatra and to Cleopatra's country, Egypt, and bring back statues and things all the way from Cairo to Paris, which are still there standing today. They had, in that sense, neither nationalism nor patriotism, but a more universalistic set of abstract values, such as egalitarianism. And so then we can contrast, for instance, Mao's Little Red Book, and so the experts of politics in China, for example, will say, China is governed in a serious way of having personal relationships, clientelism. Clientelism is a powerful, important example of personal relationship that I'm talking to you about, to be able to analytically look at this. And you folks are answering in too much classical Calvinist ways. Okay, so in that sense, I'm not saying that you should change, but you need to become more self-conscious to assess in the distinctiveness of who you are, and you can find it in your own identity, in your own family, but you can also find it especially in the books and on emotionally powerful things such as having an encampment here on the campus. Or should we have an encampment? And then the president writes a letter right there as to why we're not in favor, we're not against it. We will respect it insofar as it does not conflict with the basic values of this university. As long as you don't conflict with other people wanting to do their style of thinking. So in that sense, it's an individualism, an intellectual individualism. Yeah.
Last question. Nationalism, yeah. All of them have in common that they desire self-determination. However, patriotism is an emotional feeling which is different in each nation.
Well, at least the name, when you say I'm a very patriotic Frenchman, and another one is a very patriotic Chinese.
That's different.
But the follow-up question is, how much do they really feel about which is different? And so as people like Lipset and I and others, say Engelhardt, when we get these survey data, we find, there are a lot of things that are shared across countries. So within India, for instance, we'd analyze the data for the Indian citizens, or let me even back up. We look for rural-urban differences I think in about 80 countries. How strong are the rural-urban differences, and where and why do people don't have these rural-urban differences? In terms of trust, and how much does rural-urban lead to trust or not? And that works. That's Tocqueville's idea. Does Tocqueville's idea, at least of citizens of interaction, build trust? And the answer is, in about, I think we had something like 50 countries for which we had the data, and the answer was only 2 of them worked as Tocqueville had. That is, in that sense, things have changed. So, or at least my interpretation is in part that it's a measure of, I used it as a measure of globalization. Globalization has become so important through cell phones and travel and education and so forth, that even the rural-urban differences okay, so there's I did a paper on how globalization has transformed the 19th century. The fundamental big social theme of the late 19th century was rural and urban, the rise of the city, the cosmopolitan cold. So when Weber was writing, he was thinking as well of the cold, impersonal relations of markets, breaking with the German or the village or the Swiss, the ideal of the communal, trusting small town. So that, and my point is, that is destroyed relative to that period by the late 20th century in many of these surveys, and I was frankly shocked. I mean, okay, so let's but okay, you're asking questions. We're having good discussion. We're at the end of class in terms of time, but I haven't talked in further detail, and I'll just hold up these 2 books, American Federalism, and then this is the edited book with Elazar. Is too close or too far?
It's perfect.
Okay, good.
It's clear.
40 books. Well, and I'll just add that I had the ideas. I saw these people working on similar things. Vildovsky, Elazar, Lipset, Engelhardt, and me. And I said, why don't the 5 of us get together every year? And we did for I don't know how many years it was, almost 10 years. And we talked about all these things and argued with each other. And so where and how we could build on one another and make these things more systematic. And they did lead to, say, Lipset. Well, I co-authored with Engelhardt with part of the New Political Culture. With Elazar, we worked on a book on world on distinctive. That is, Elazar wanted to add change in the way and go beyond tradition. He saw that I really had done a book called The New Political Culture, which was the change of political culture. Whereas Elazar said, I don't have a theory of change. Let's join together and let's work on this together. And we did. Okay, so I've given you the context of these people, their ideas, their basic concerns, the Parsons table. These are the pieces you should be thinking about where and why all the examples we've been talking about today fit together. And if you are creatively reading and thinking about this stuff, all of you who are not in here in person, but you've done a great job on the exams, which we're sending these out. You're doing most of the class are doing it via impersonally, not in this classroom, but you're learning, you're thinking, you're mastering this stuff well, and that's great. And keep at it, and we will respond to any more questions. But you're the ones. I mean, all of the specific readings of specific books, only any one idea. there'll be better things in the next decade or two. What the most important thing you're learning is how to learn yourself. New things. Okay. Ending there for today.